Alright, in this video I'm going to show you how to partition a hard drive into multiple drives. So this is the idea of taking one physical disk drive and splitting it into more than one drive on your computer. This can be useful if you're wanting to set up multiple operating systems on your drive, and so you want to have different operating systems to boot from but only one drive. Or you want to take, like in my case, I have a 240 gig solid state drive, and I want to be able to utilize that for some temporary storage. So I can just like throw files over there real quick. I also want to use it to install a Windows 7 operating system and a Linux operating system, and then might be some other things I would do with it. But I want to utilize that drive because it is a more expensive drive. I want to be able to utilize that for more purposes. Okay, so you're going to want to go and click on Start, and then go to Control Panel. You can also just click on Start and type in Disk Management, and you can click on Create and Format Hard Disk Partitions, or if you're on Windows 7, this should just say Disk Management. Or if you click on Start and go to Control Panel, you can search the Control Panel for Disk Management. Oops. And then here click Create and Format Hard Disk Partitions. This will open up the disk management, and it'll say connecting to virtual disk service. So depending on how many drives you have, this will take a little bit of time to load up, so just be patient with it. Alright, once it loads, it'll give you a readout of every drive connected to your device. So let's go ahead and maximize this. So here we have all the different drives that have been connected to this machine, and also you can see now the breakout of every partition. So for instance, here is the disk 0. So this is one of the disk drives in my computer, and you can see here this is my main operating system drive. So here's the operating system, the C drive, but there's also a system reserved partition that you don't see in your computer on that drive. So one thing that is convenient is to make sure you've got your drives labeled. So if you look here in File Explorer, I had labeled my solid state drive when I installed it as SSD. And to label a drive, you simply right click on it in File Explorer, go to Properties, and then under the General tab right here you can change the name of it. Makes it helpful when you're in disk management so you can see your partitions, and so I can see here my SSD drive F is actually disk number 3 in the computer, and so I know this is the one I want to work with. The reason you want to be careful is in my case here, I do have, like here, my D drive is my data drive. I want to be very careful that I don't accidentally start working on that drive and delete all my information off of it. So do be careful in here. Stay away from the format button unless you're absolutely sure what drive you've selected. So here's SSD. This is the drive I want to break into sections, so I'm going to right click on it. Now you have a couple options. I can do a shrink volume, or I can do a delete volume. If I delete the volume, it's going to delete that drive letter F and pretty much make the drive, make no usable space on the drive unless I create more. And that's what I'm actually going to do in this case. But if you already have information on that drive, so let's say I actually did have files. Let's say I was going to do something with like this data drive that I do have files on. I would want to do shrink volume. And I'll show you here real quick. When you click shrink volume, this allows you to shrink the existing drive letter, the existing drive partition, to a smaller amount. That's a really cool feature because you can take the partition, shrink it down, and have extra space. In my situation here, I know this drive SSD is completely blank. You can verify that here by going to File Explorer, opening up SSD, and the drive is blank. There's no data that I'm going to be losing. So I'm going to right click on SSD and click Delete Volume. It's going to confirm that you want to delete this and that it will delete any data that is on that partition. Do I want to continue? I'm going to click Yes. Now on disk 3 it says unallocated. So now this is pretty much there's no usable drive there as far as Windows is concerned. So you'll see here my SSD drive under File Explorer is completely gone. So now what I want to do is create some smaller partitions on this SSD drive that I have in my computer. So now I'm going to right click on the unallocated section and click New Simple Volume. Then I'll click Next. And here is where I'm going to specify the size in megabytes that I want this new volume to be. So I have a total available space of roughly 228 gigabytes. So I'm going to say for this first partition, I'm just going to need a 50 gigabyte piece of data. So I'm going to do 50,000 megabytes, which would be 50 gigabytes. Click Next. You assign the drive letter based upon the available drive letters that you have. So F is fine. Click Next. It's going to ask you to format the partition, format this volume with the following settings. NTFS is probably fine. Depending on what you're doing with it, you may need different things, but you can always format this later if you're installing an operating system that needs a different file system. So NTFS is a good starting point for that. Allocation unit size, do default unless you know you're going to be doing something else. If you're going to be doing some kind of database or something like that, you may need to make this higher, but otherwise just leave it as default. In volume label, give this some name so you can recognize it later and know what it is. So for this drive, I'm going to call this Windows 7. I'll just call it Win7 because this is the drive I'm going to install Windows 7 on. Perform a quick format is checked. I would leave that checked, otherwise you'll wait quite a long time for it to format. A quick format is just fine in this case. Enable file and folder compression. You don't necessarily need that enabled unless you're going to be doing, again, you can enable some of that stuff later. So we'll click on Next, confirm our settings, and click Finish. It'll take a few seconds to a few minutes to allocate that space on that disk drive and create and format that partition. Alright, so now once it finishes, it pops open in File Explorer that new partition, Windows Win7F. So if I go back to my computer, I can see that partition here with my 48.8 gigabytes. We put 50 gigabytes, but there's a conversion issue that I'll have to save for another video of why those amounts are a little bit off. But there it is, my blank drive ready to go. And if we go back to Disk Manager, we can see there's that partition I just created, and we can still see we have 174 roughly gigabytes of data left. So I'm going to actually right click again on Unallocated and click New Simple Volume. Go through the same process again. This time I'm only going to do a 40 gigabyte section. Yeah, 40 should be good. Click Next. Pick another drive letter. The next one I have available is L. You can see here you would eventually run out of letters, so you can only have so many partitions. But we'll go with L. Same thing, NTFS default, and this I'm actually going to call Linux, because this is where I'm going to put a Linux installation on my computer, and click on Next, and then we'll click Finish, and it'll go through the same process, creating another partition on that solid state drive I have. So there we go. Now it's finished. Now if I go back to my computer, I'll see I have the Win7 drive F, and there it is, Linux drive L. So now if we are looking disk management, we'll see the disk 3, which is my solid state 240 gig solid state drive. I have a 48.8 gig Win7 partition, drive letter F, and a 39 gig partition for Linux, and I still have 135 gigs unallocated. You could leave that unallocated and use it down the road, or you could go ahead and make a new simple volume and just leave it at the default here, which would basically fill up the rest of this available space. And we could just do something like, temp storage or something like that, and then, fill it up. But in this case, I'm actually just going to leave that unallocated because I don't need it for anything yet. And who knows, later on you may want to use it for something else. So that's how you create partitions. And then what you would do is when I go to set up Windows 7 and Linux on this computer, I'll take note of the size of these partitions and the drive letters, so that when I install the system, I know which drive I'm installing that on. because you don't want to put in your Windows 7 format CD and accidentally wipe over your data on the wrong drive. So definitely take note of this screen here, take note of the drive letter and the size of the drive so that when you're setting up your operating system, if you're setting up multiple operating systems, you know which drive you're working on. So thank you for watching this video on how to create partitions on your hard drive using Windows Disk Management. If you have any questions, please post them in the comments below. Thank you for watching.